Okay, it's a great honor, pleasure to be here. This is only the second time I present this paper, so curious for your comments. The title is Sorry We Closed, Loan Conditions When Bank Branches Close and Firms Transfer to Another Bank. And it's very much work with Diana Bonfim, who's at the Bank of Portugal, and Gilles Noguer, who's actually was at the Bank of Portugal, is now at NYU starting his PhD. And in all fairness, actually, it's almost like Gilles' paper, because he's really has been sort of come up with the idea and worked a lot on sort of trying to estimate what we're doing in the paper. So, you know, credit where credit is due. Now, in terms of very small introduction, notice that firms may receive a lower interest rate when switching banks. Okay, so I have this paper with Vaso using Bolivian credit register, where we show that if firms go to another bank, they receive a discount of 89 basis points. And for Italy, it has been shown by Barona, Felici, and Pagnini that the discount when you go to another bank is 44 basis points. And actually, this is from our JF paper with Vaso. This is time. This is sort of before and after switch, and this is sort of a discount of 89 basis points. And also notice the path then on which the loan rates are developing. This is all matched out, so this is accounting for characteristics. After switching, actually firms get a further discount, and then at some point the interest rates start increasing. Okay, so this is sort of the backdrop of this paper, because in this paper, what we're going to try to do is say, okay, but why is there a discount? We try to take one step further than this paper I have with Vaso. Why? Because in that paper, we sort of, at some point, try to set up exercises to see whether or not this is information asymmetry or Schuldletter cost. But in effect, there's still potentially room for additional empirical steps. And so why is that? Because this discount may be for non-monetary Schuldletter cost of switching. Think about you know, software or personnel that needs to be trained using the new bank's software. Or it could be because of information asymmetries. And Bing has already alluded to this large literature, in specifically to the Sharp-Rajan paper. I'm going to focus actually in the presentation more of the on the Von Taden paper, because it's of course the correct version, if you want, of the Sharp paper. Plus it's also really the generic model without all the complexities like in Rajan and Hauswald and Marquez paper. Okay, so this is, but why is there this discount? This is sort of what we're trying to take an additional step in answering in this paper. So in this paper, what we're going to do, we're going to study the loan condition when bank branches close. So in and of itself, that's also an interesting question. And firms are going to subsequently transfer to a branch of another bank in the vicinity. That's really the setup that we are going to focus on. And we're going to basically observe the conditions granted when banks may then pool price. Because why this uniform of mill pricing? Because if a branch closes of another bank, suddenly there's a whole pool of applicants going to arrive at other banks. And so the pricing that is going to occur then may be different, may or may not be different from the pricing that occur when firms individually switch. Okay, so I'm going to use the lingo transferring when we have this branch closure and all of these firms are going to start moving about at once. Or switching is when individual firms are going to show up with another bank and are going to receive a certain loan rate. And recall from what I just said, for this switching, seemingly the firms get a discount. Okay? What we're going to find is actually that the transfer loans do not receive a discount in loan rates. Okay? When firm otherwise switch banks, they do receive this discount. Also in this application here, I'll going to show that. Our benchmarking is vis-a-vis this switching. Okay? So the switching is, we're going to see, actually the switching discount is going to be very similar here in this setup. It's in Portugal, it's another country. And then we're going to take this additional step. We're going to say, now we have these branch closures. What is happening to the rate when these firms are actually showing up en masse, right? Many of them together. And so this is going to augment empirical evidence on this dynamic cycle in loan rates. information asymmetry seems to be the most likely explanation, because it's actually consistent with this set of information asymmetry model being, and also the citations there were already mentioned. Okay, so contributions here. We're going to try to be the first study of the impact of bank branch closures on the conditions of individual loans. Of course, people have looked at banks present, also closure, local development, crime, access to credit, switching behavior, welfare, consumer, financial health. I mean, these are the citations here. We're going to be the first one looking at individual bank loan conditions, okay? And we can indeed try to, I mean, one interpretation of what we're observing here is that the bank is maybe pool pricing or uniform pricing the clients that are arriving in a group. Okay, so now why study branch closures? Okay, why study branch closures? Because when a branch closes, the bank-firm relationship may be cut if the closest branch of the same bank is far away. Okay, so your branch closes. Suddenly you start looking around, wow, this branch is like, 20 kilometers away, I'm not going to that other branch, because that's way too far from my business. I mean, I have no time to do this, so I go to another bank. I'm not the only one making this calculation. A lot of firms are making the same. We all show up at another branch in group, okay? Now, these other banks know this because branch closures are observable, right? They're announced. All of these firms start floating around, showing up. So these other banks know that these firms are now orphaned and have to transfer. Okay? Reasonable to expect that this would be a situation in which they would actually pool price. Okay? And this is what the paper is about. Now, notice that if you have a switch, we're talking about an individual firm or firm owner or representative of the firm showing up at the branch. If you have transfers, now suddenly there are many, okay? And this is where potentially the pool pricing would come from. Now, in terms of theoretical predictions, the hypothesis is von Taden. And again, think about this model as sort of the generic and actually correct version of some of the papers that are cited there already before, also in Bing's presentation. So each period, firms may switch banks in that model. They obtain new loans from new outside banks instead of one of their existing inside lenders. Firms that switch are going to receive a loan rate offer from an outside bank that is lower than the offer received from their inside bank. Okay? So there is this offer curve in this model. The outside banks are drawing from this offer curve. It's a bit mechanic in that they're playing mixed strategic equilibrium. They sort of end up offering, the firms are going to switch when the loan rate is lower. Okay? Now, over time, of course, the outside bank becomes an insider, starts extracting rents. This is sort of pushing the model a little bit because it's a two-period model. So in terms of interpretation here, you need to be a bit elastic in how you interpret this second period. But this is basically in von Taden, and because then of adverse selection, a higher proportion of switching firms is worse in terms of unobservable risk characteristics than if the firms had been randomly drawn from the population. Okay? So now we're going to study branch closures because it's sort of a nice way to get to see, potentially observe what's happening in the first period in that model. Why? Because in this first period, all banks are going to pool price. Okay? This is potentially a situation, it's almost like a little experiment where pool pricing may actually occur, because in normal time, so to speak, we're in the second period of this model because the banks have engaged the clients and clients individually may show up, but they're never going to show up in a pool. Okay? So this is the loan rate we may be able to observe after branches close and firms have to go elsewhere. So in the model, banks will compete away the rents they anticipate. So in this von Taden and other frameworks, there's a rate which is going to be slightly lower than fair because in the second period, they all know they're going to capture some rents. Okay? Now, can we actually, so this is going to push the loan rate below this fair rate. Can we predict what this loan rate will be? Yes, we can. Actually, here, this is the final slide on the theory, but this von Taden model and related frameworks, they actually, analytically, if you start trying to manipulate them, they get a bit convoluted. Okay, so this sort of predictions, if you want, are based on simulations also that we did for the paper with Vaso, and they're very much in sync with simulations also in black of this specific model because the analytics are a bit too much to handle, at least sort of these distributions cannot be that easily manipulated. Anyway, if you look within the confines of these simulations, you know, with all their limitations and constraints, the interest rate discount on the transfer loan can be less than 1/3 of the discount on the switching loans, okay, compared to the loans granted by the outside bank. And this is, you know, I'm not going to explain this, but this is sort of a figure of these simulations where you run for certain parameter values what would be indeed the rates that are being charged to the different sets of firms. Now, the main intuition, and this is sort of, you know, without going to the mechanics of these models, which to some extent are also limited because they're a bit mechanical in the sense that, you know, these banks don't anticipate all of this. They sort of play a certain strategy once the game is on. But the main intuition is that the interest rate on a transfer loan will be closer to the average rate. How much closer, of course, is difficult to say, than the average loan rate, than the interest rate on a switching loan, which is very low, in order to poach the client. Okay? So the switching, individual firms going somewhere, it's about poaching. It's about another bank branch having to offer a loan rate which is low enough to get that client. If you do a transfer loan, you don't have to do that. These people just show up. So why would you offer such an aggressive discount? This is the main intuition. And then this is reflected in some reasonable interpretation of this class of models. Okay? And why do you poach the client? To rip them off, or him or her off afterwards. Of course, that then remains to be answered. Why is this? Why is this game being played repeatedly, etc., etc.? But you know, this is well beyond what we are trying to contribute here in this paper. So we're going to look at the interest rate on something that could be looking like this pool price, this transfer loan, and we're going to see how it is compared to this switching discount that we seem also to observe in this specific setting. Now, the main concern is, of course, these branch closures. These branch closures are not random. There will never be. There's not such an experiment out there that we would have sort of an economist like ourselves randomly drawing a branch and closing it. Okay, that will never happen. So if we ever want to study this, we can forget pure randomness at this level. However, we do have in Portugal a series of branch closures which were, you know, partly imposed. Okay, so we have these branch closures in Portugal on banks which were recapitalized, and the Troika, as part of the bailout package, told them to close branches. Okay. Now, in exchange for these funds, the banks had to submit restructuring plans with the aim of improving profitability and solvency. Now, we have anecdotes from inside those banks that actually the way this was within the bank decided was actually fairly random. I mean, we heard one anecdote where basically at a top level meeting, they were just going through branches like that and closing them. Now, it's a bit hard to believe that this was fully true in all banks and all times, and maybe there was just a sort of a show at a sort of a high level meeting to sort of indicate that they couldn't care less. But typically these branch closures, even in such a context, are not going to be fully random, right? And that is, of course, from an empirical point of view, a major issue which we cannot get around fully, but we'll try to do our best. So this is a prime and blunt cost-cutting measure, and it is somewhat indiscriminate. According to these anecdotes, fully indiscriminate, but anecdotes are only that. So they are not always based on local branch quality of firms and their profitability. These are this is the map of Portugal, because I was very unfamiliar with Portugal before starting to go there a couple of years ago, and I did not know where Porto was before I have this map here. So this is Lisbon, this is Porto. A lot of bank closures are in Lisbon and Porto, and 6 banks are actually associated with 82% of the closures. Okay, and they represent 70% of all firm bank relationships. So these 800 branch closures are really among the major banks. I mean, they all were a bit in problem. And this is concentrated in Lisbon and Porto, and which is again, so one of the issues you may also be very concerned about is that, well, you know, these are clearly not good times in Portugal. given that these branch closures were imposed, maybe what we're picking up here is something that is due to this crisis. So of course all of this is going to be matched out compared to the other loan conditions in that same time period. I'll talk more about the practicalities later on. So concentrated in Lisbon and Porto. So these are again 25 and 80% of all bank relationships, and all of the closures, many of the closures are there. So now, branch selection may be mild, and one sort of key piece of information, which I'm going to front load here, but you'll have to wait a little bit to see it develop, is that one key piece of information is actually prior to these branch closures, the discount that we're going to see on switching loans arriving at these or granted by these branches that are going to be closed, the discount there is going to be very similar to the discount that we observe in normal times. Okay, so this is sort of a benchmarking. So it's in the 6 months prior to these branch closures. The discount that we're going to observe there, that is being given to firms that arrive as switchers to these branches, is very similar to the discount that we observe in the rest of the country and in other times. Okay, so this is sort of a benchmark within the confines of the exercise that we do, which we think is quite strong and is showing that actually that these branch closures are not taking place in branches that are particular, that are unique. Okay, at least not when it comes to the discount that they are willing to offer to arriving clients. Okay. You'll see that result appear later on. I think it's very important to notice this immediately up front. Now, if anything, actually, the transfer loans may be suggesting that the transferees may be of higher quality. Of course, you're going to say that's obvious because those that are going to show up at other banks are going to be of higher quality. It's not so. I mean, there's going to be a selection on those that actually are going to end up moving quickly to another branch. Okay, again, in the exercise we're going to match that out, but I just noticed this because it does not suggest that, at least leaving aside this selection, that the branches which are closed were actually of lower quality. Okay, so but again we will do further robustness on these branch closures. Why? Because we think that we can in the set of branch closures potentially identify, or we can pick up certain branch closures that are even more exogenous for sort of some rudimentary reasons. By the way, if you have questions, just ask them immediately. It's probably more efficient than sort of waiting towards the end. And the time, how am I doing on time? Yeah, but I mean, just want to make sure I get through. So we're going to exclude all the branch closures after December 2014, when also the banks had to start to report loan rates. You'll see that. But so these branch closures potentially give you more time to reflect. Okay, so here, this is a date. Before this date, actually, only the large banks, only the 6 large banks actually had to report loan rates. Afterwards, all banks have to report loan rates. So in addition to being a useful robustness check, because the data configuration slightly changes, and we could suspect that maybe banks giving the fact that they now have to report loan rates would maybe alter their behavior, or we would not know. In addition, so this is not purely clean, because we have both this change in reporting. All the banks, rather than the largest ones, have to report loan rates. But also, there's an additional component here, is that maybe they have more time to reflect. So the later closures are clearly more or less random. They're more a result of introspection by the bank into what is a good branch to close. So we'll exclude those. We'll run all the exercise in appendix on this. We also exclude branch closures in Lisbon and Porto. Why? Because these branches are closer to the headquarters. You could think up certain models where basically these branch managers would have more sway over the decision making. They're closer to the central unit where these decisions are being made, and so they preserve their own job. So we'll exclude those branch closures in Lisbon and Porto, and those branches in the province are potentially more sort of randomly closed, because if they're closer to the headquarters, maybe they're more selected. Okay, if you really want to close a branch close to the headquarters, you really make sure it's the right branch. And we're going to include only banks closures by banks that were recapitalized with bailout funds. Okay, why is that? Because if you're recapitalized with a bailout fund, the Troika is really telling you, look, you really have to close. And so again, you're sort of under stress, you need to close rapidly, and so these are going to be more externally imposed. Having said that, we have no evidence or anecdotes that any institution or members of these institutions were actually telling the branch which branches to close. That would be even better if that indication was totally random, okay? Which potentially it could be having a more random component, given that these members of these institutions may not be that knowledgeable about the individual branch characteristics, okay? But we have no indication that this happened, so this was truly a program that was imposed on the bank. You need to restructure, you need to cut costs. Why don't you close some branches? Okay, and then the banks quickly had to do that. And so some banks actually closed branches. They were not recapitalized by these bailout funds. So in principle, they could have been under less stress. So by focusing on those, potentially we get a little bit more exogeneity. And again, we sort of run all the exercises only with those. But I'm going to focus on the exercise with the entire set, given that the results are so similar all around. Yes, sorry.
Just a comment.
Yeah.
I know for a fact that Troika didn't tell them.
Okay, okay. You may be part of the exercise, or okay, yeah. I mean, that may not have been formally in papers, but we also got no anecdotes whatsoever that they were telling them which branch to close. Anyway, so this is the switching and transfer. So here is one of the issues with this credit register, which is actually present in many credit registers, is that we do not know at which branch the client is based, right? So there's no branch identifier on all of these exposures. So we are going to basically, as in many other papers, assume that these small firms are doing business with the closest branch of the bank where they have the loan. Okay? Now notice in the context of our exercises, this is not going to be such a major issue, and let me tell you immediately why. So we're going to have firms, and we're going to have those firms being serviced by a branch of a bank 1 where they have the loan. And notice that this is the closest branch of this bank where these firms have their loans. Okay? I mean, there's plenty evidence that firms are doing business with very close branches, and so there may be some noise here if some of these firms would be doing business with another branch of that same bank, but it's very unlikely, and in effect it should not have much large impact of the exercise we're about to do. So now this is going to be a switch, and a switch is going to be defined if indeed the firm is going to another bank, Bank 2, a branch of Bank 2, where it did not have any contact with for the last year. Okay, I'll come back to that later on a little bit, but this is a switch. So you go by yourself, nobody else is going, there's no closure, this is a switch. Now, what is a closure? Well, this is a closure, a bank closes, and we're now having firms that are going to show up at other branches. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to say these are going to be transfers. These are transfers because they're located, they're going to show up at the branch of Bank 2. This is not going to be a transfer if this firm is actually located within a 5-kilometer radius of Bank 1 branch. Okay, so we really want to isolate. So notice we're sort of going to zoom in here on a set of firms that somehow, when their bank branch closes, the other branches of these banks are really far away. Okay, and we condition on the fact that we see them showing up in group in a branch of another bank. Okay, so notice we're not going to explore in the paper, even though, I mean, we sort of could, and we maybe will also be interesting to see what happened to the conditions of this firm, for example, many of which may actually show up at the branch of Bank 1 and remain with the bank. So we're not going to look for the time being, maybe it's on our to-do list, maybe within the confines of this paper or in other papers, where maybe the conditions are then if your branch is closed and maybe you stay within the same bank. Here we really are going to zoom in on this these loan conditions when the firm is going to be showing up at the branch of another bank. Okay. And so again, there was no contact with this. There was no contact with this bank for the last year, making it sort of a new bank. Okay. So this is in other sort of graphics, if you want. So we're going to say this is a non-switching loan. So here is T minus 12. Here's T0. So we have bank 1 used by firm A. That firm had a loan here, gets a new loan here, while the previous contact with that bank 1 is less than 1 year ago. This is a non-switching loan. This is another non-switching loan to the same firm. This is a switching loan. So here we have bank 3. Bank 3 was doing some business with firm A before, but it predates 12 months. And then at some point, the firm initiates a new loan. This is called a switching loan. Okay. So notice also here that switching, to some extent, is going to go to another bank, but you may still have existing outstanding loans with the bank. So the switching is not sort of a bilateral switch where you really close everything at one bank and then you turn around, you go to another bank. That operationally, that almost never happens. Not in the Bolivian data set, not in the Portuguese data set. So why? Because I mean, think about this in practice. If you have a set of accounts with a bank, you're lured by the conditions of a new bank, you want to go have a loan there, you're not going to close all your accounts and all your business with the previous bank, right? So given that these relationships are actually going to be defined on the basis of all products and not just individual loans, switching is in addition is principally going to be adding of banks. Okay, but you do switch in the sense that you're going to show up at a new bank and you're going to get a loan right there. You're going to get a new loan there. This is going to be a transfer loan. So here we have the bank 4 closing. So we have the closest branch of bank 1 closes, and then bank 4 is now the receiving bank. It's it's more than 1 year ago that this firm A was receiving a loan from this bank 4. So this is going to be a transfer loan. We're going to call this a first transfer loan and a later transfer loan if indeed this bank 4 or another bank is going to give a new loan. Okay, so we're going to, in the exercise you'll see later on, we're going to have first transfer loans. This is the first time that the firm is going to show up with another bank than the branch of which is closing. And we're going to have later transfer loans for loans following that, which could again be with another bank. So with a bank 5 here in the graph. Okay, so this is basically the exercise we're going to do. We're going to compare the rate on the switching loan with the rate on these transfer loans. Now the data is the credit register of Portugal, which is loans. It's aggregated at the monthly level. There's underlying individual loan contracts. We're going to focus on 87 to 2015. This is the credit register. So this is the entire credit register. Of course, we're interested in the loan rate. So the loan rate is actually only available since June 2012 and then May 2015 with that cutoff date for all banks having to report. Okay, so this is the loan rate information, which is sort of nice because it's actually the nominal loan rate which is on these loans. Which, by the way, notice in Italian papers using the credit register, they have to back this out. Also in using the German credit register, they have to back this out. So here it's really the actual nominal loan rate that is being reported. Okay. Then the opening and closing day of all the bank branches is also there in another data set. So this gets all sewed together, and then this is going to be the time period. So 2012-06, 2015-05, we're going to have 1,300,000 new loans. We're going to have about 100,000 firms. So this is what's in play. And so now, despite the presence of this credit registry, information symmetries are going to remain. Why? Because the information is actually limited to previous 2 months. Okay, so the memory of this credit register when it comes to non-performance, when it comes to once an overdue loan is being repaid, it only remains on the book for 2 months. Okay, so it's a very short memory. And after that, there's no trace. At least the banks cannot observe when they tap into the credit register past non-performance, past this 2-month mark. And this is, by the way, this memory loss is common for many credit registers. Fair enough to say that in many credit registers the memory is longer, right? I mean, it's sort of, I mean, in Colombia it was infinite, and then it got shortened now to 2 years, or?
Depends on the length of the delinquency.
Okay, yeah, that's true. Now I 3 years, so say, okay, yeah. But so here 2 months is really short. I mean, it's nice from an information asymmetry point of view. Now, there's actually a few other sources of information. Most of these firms are really small. I mean, they're small Portuguese firms. That's the bulk of what we have in the sample here, and they do not have audited financial statements. And the banking sector is a principal source of funds for most firms, and credit derivatives are not widely used by neither by the banks or the firms. So this is sort of really a bread and butter banking system which is operating there. Okay, some summary statistics. So this is from our study, the number of firms. These are the switches. This is the switching rate per year. Notice here we have Farinha Santos study, which is using de novo firms in Portugal. So these are newly created firms that go from singular to multiple bank relationships. Okay, and so that transition, that switching rate, which is actually quite similar to how we would define a switching rate. Still, it's for a selected set of firms is slightly lower. I mean, one robustness we could do now that I think about, we could once look at the de novo firms. Okay, we haven't done that. But so overall, these switching rates are ballpark similar, though slightly lower in the Farinha Santos, but these are new firms. Then these are for the new loans. This is the switching rate. Here, this is the overall switching rate, and this is of which 1,000 or so are transferring. In the paper with Vaso, we have basically a switching rate. This is for Bolivia, which is 1 percentage point or more higher. Okay, and so this is. This is of course another institutional setting, what have you, but just to sort of benchmark the numbers here again, that not crazy, obviously. I mean, it's not like we're seeing here a system that is, where people are rotating banks every day. So these are then the characteristics in terms of the outcome variable and other characteristics. So we have here the switching loans and the non-switching loans, okay? And I'm going to actually color code switching in green, as you already noticed. We have an interest rate in basis points here, 609. This is going to be substantially lower than that on the non-switching loans. But also notice that there's quite a few other stars for risk indicator, whether the firm, the limited company, default, limited, public, and then some loan characteristics. I'll come back to discuss those. And the exposures of this firm. So all of this is clearly telling us that we have to be very careful with these univariate comparisons. Okay, we're going to match out all these differences. These are then for the transfer loans, and notice here that actually we're going to have a result that the interest rate on these transfer loans is going to be even lower than on the switching rate. Why is that? I can already tell you that this is because we partly see better firms actually showing up as transferees, and so even more so important to match out all these differences adequately. Okay, very good. Again, are worst branches closed? Seemingly not. As transfer loans are of higher quality, they have a higher credit rating, lower default, more collateral, longer maturity, etc., etc. Okay, so we'll need to match out all of this to make sure that our inferences about the rates that they receive are going to be reasonable. So there's going to be a selection on which firms are observed to transfer, and there may be some geographical distribution of closures. Hence, what is really needed in an exercise like this, a setting like this, is matching. We're going to do very, very sort of, given that we have plenty of data here, we're going to do an exact match. More precisely, we're going to do a quotient exact match because we're going to have a few continuous variables. Okay, but we don't need to rely on propensity score matching because we have a lot of observation to work with here, and so given propensity score matching's tendency to occasionally end up selecting firms that may still differ in some of the underlying characteristics, with an coarse and exact match, we're absolutely sure that the two sets are going to be fully similar and fully controlled for within the ranges that we set on our quotient matching. So these are the variables we're going to match on. So macro, so this is an important variable because clearly something is happening here in Portugal, so we need to control for the exact time that these loans are going to be granted. We're going to match on the inside bank, outside bank, and this is important. I'll come back to that in a second. So the inside bank, we're going to match on the outside bank, and color coding here, brown, yellow. We're also going to match, we can actually push the matching here towards firm. Okay, we can actually match on firm identity. Come back to that in a second. We're also going to match on bank type, whether or not it's a foreign bank or a domestic bank. We can match on credit rating, region, industry, legal structure, and then we're going to match on a set of loan characteristics: collateral, loan maturity, loan amount, floating loan rate. Now, these are of course loan conditions which are going to be set concurrently with the loan rate. So they're sort of bad controls, they're sort of bad variables to match on. Having said that, this depends a bit on how you think about when the loan rate is being set and how it is being set. Okay, so if the loan rate is being set after all of this and not in anticipation of how some of these other variables are being set, then what we do in the main line of the exercises, we're fine. If you think, however, that these loan conditions are all jointly set, we're not doing very clean stuff here. So we redo everything without these matching on these loan conditions as well. Of course, we'll return also to see whether or not these loan conditions are going to change as well. Okay, but for the time being, the matching I'm going to show you is also matching on these other loan conditions, which actually, if they're not bad controls, if they're really sort of set prior to the setting of the loan rate, they actually may help create a good match. Because why? Because in collateral, loan maturity, loan amount, the bank may sort of partly load some of the things that it observes about this client. So some of the unobservable heterogeneity that may still consist after matching on all of these other variables could be, in the best case scenario, matched out by also matching on these loan conditions. In the case that all of this is set jointly, then they're bad controls. We should match on them, and if we don't, the results are the same. Okay. All right, so switching is going to be defined as we have how am I doing on time? Because
35 minutes.
That's good. We'll be there. So we're going to have XYZ firms having bank 1, bank 2. Notice that, of course, what we're really interested in is when we want to know the loan rate for a switching loan is what was the offer that this firm was actually receiving when staying with that inside bank. This would be matching on the inside bank. This is interesting. Why? Because it can tell us something about an offer that we are unable to observe, right? Because we only observe actual loan contracts. And so we're going to try to achieve this by matching on conditions that we observe for loans that are granted by the inside bank to very similar firms. Okay, matching on the conditions that we were on the characteristics that we were showing here. Okay, so here we have basically a firm A that is going to switch to a bank 3. Why is this firm A switching to bank 3? Because notice that there was no services delivered by this bank prior to more than 1 year ago, and now suddenly we see this firm showing up in bank's 3 portfolio. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to say, okay, what does this firm potentially receive as an offer from the banks that it's currently doing business with, meaning bank 1 and bank 2. And so we're going to match this loan that this firm is receiving from this new bank with conditions that are prevailing at that very moment in time on other loans that are being granted to very similar firms, including potentially the firm itself, but not necessarily. If the firm concurrently with getting a loan from bank 3, which is the new bank, which is the bank where it switches to, also gets a loan from a bank where it did do business for the last 12 months, then that loan would also be included in the set when it's matching time on inside bank. Okay, so when we match on the inside bank, we're really trying to achieve sort of a reasonable guess of an offer that this firm A would have received from their inside banks. Actually, this is more than just a reasonable guess, but of course there could be still differences in having this loan compared to other loans, something unobserved, etc. Okay, and we're trying to average this out by also then comprising loans that are granted to other firms XYZ by Bank 1 and Bank 2, which are in the inside set of firm A, matched. Okay, similar firms. This is matching on the inside bank. Matching on the outside bank is basically now we have this firm A, goes to Bank 3, it's the same firm, and now we're going to match with loans that are being granted by Bank 3 to other firms. Maybe XYZ is a bit sort of, given that we were using this before, but other firms, okay? Now, of course, the firm itself is not in that set because it's going to a new bank, an outside bank. That set does not include firm A yet, and so the matching exercise has to, by construction, include other firms only, or loans to other firms only. So this is switching to the outside bank, going to color code that yellow, okay? Now the results. The way we're going to set this up, we do this exact matching. We have pairs, we have a loan rate of a loan that we observe, a switching loan or a transfer loan, and we're going to have a comparable loan to another firm matched out. We're going to have these pairs. Now, once we have these pairs, we're going to run this spread of this loan rate between the two loan rates, the actual loan that we observe, the switching loan or transfer loan, and then the paired matched loan. We're going to run that spread in loan rate on a constant. And why do we do that? Because in that way, we can achieve two things at the same time within a linear regression context. This is following what we did in the paper with Vaso. We can cluster at the switching firm level, which is actually much easier to do when you consider a loading on a constant than if you have to sit there univariately cluster or sort of put together means of a set of loan rate spreads, keeping track of to which firm these spreads belong. Okay, so by using the loading on the constant, we can easily cluster at the switching firm level, given regression technology, and we can also easily weigh each observation by 1 over the total number of comparable non-switching loans per switching loan. Okay, because we don't want switching loans that, for whatever reason, are being paired with a lot of other non-switching loans to be overrepresented in the final result that we get. Okay, because there could be some random reason for why some firm loan can be matched with many others, and so we can do the downweighing here or the appropriately weighing, and we can do the clustering. Okay, so what I'm going to show you now is basically this is matching on the inside, this is going to be matching on the outside banks, and this is going to be matching on the firm, and I'm going to show you the coefficients on the interest rate spreads from pairs of switching loans and non-switching loans. Okay, so we're going to have matched pairs which consist of one switching loan and one non-switching loan, and a switching loan can be matched to multiple non-switching loans, and that's why we see here this is the number of non-switching loans, this is the number of switching loans, and this is the number of pairs. So we can have recurring switching loans showing up with non-switching loans in those pairs, but recall in our regressions here we're going to keep that, we're going to suppress those that are going to be showing up multiple times. This is the coefficient on the constant. So we run these spreads on this constant, clustering and weighing. And notice that this interest rate difference is order of magnitude very similar to the results in Bolivia. We have actually a spread differential, a spread there of almost 89 basis points. We couldn't believe our eyes when we got this specific result. Okay, so and this is matched out on the inside bank and also bank type. Okay, this is inside bank matching. Notice that the interest rate difference without the matching is actually very similar. So the hidden bias here is actually the matching itself doesn't give us a lot, and this is a bit surprising, but this is just the way it is. So the hidden bias here is actually fairly benign. When matching on the inside bank, this was also the case in the paper with Vaso. Matching on the outside bank, however, we have the same result, that hidden bias is fairly small. It's something I'm curious to understand. I don't understand it yet. In the paper with Vaso, the hidden bias here was sizable. We actually had a spread differential which was close to 0. Okay? But notice, matching on the inside bank, matching on the outside bank, you get a spread of, say, 60 basis points, 90 basis points. Now, this is actually quite cool, because this is actually matching on firm identity. This is an exercise we could not do for Bolivia for the simple reason that we did not have enough observations to work with. So here you actually match on firm identity. Okay, so there's a lot of heterogeneity here that is totally matched out. Okay, because I mean, you would have to come up with a firm bank-specific story for why you would observe a specific interest rate discount for this to still raise some concerns about missed heterogeneity. Okay, so notice also that the number of observations, of course, drops sizably because, you know, this is matching out on this firm identity. Again, to summarize, we have on the switchers, we have a result which is very similar to the Bolivian case, to the Italian case. So these switchers are you know, receiving a discount order of magnitude 60 to 90 basis points. Notice, by the way, you could say, well, but that needs to be assessed according to the mean interest rate, which is actually, and that's correct, this is actually quite high in Portugal in those times as well. Okay, of course, potentially because of the credit risk. Okay, so notice there's a mean switching rate of about 750 basis points. In Bolivia, in times of the study, we had about 1,300. Okay, so if you look at these spreads, they may even be a bit higher in Portugal than in Bolivia. Okay, so this is basically setting us up for now the next step in the investigation, which is really where we hope to contribute, which is on these transfer loans. So now we're going to say, okay, let's look at those loans that are going to be originated when a firm shows up and the branch was actually being closed. So the firm shows up in a new bank, and the firm is showing up. This is a switcher. This is a switch, but it's a specific type of switch. It's a transfer. Okay, so those transfer loans were not in the previous exercise. They're now going to be singled out. So we're going to have here the interest rate with matching, and this is really the paper. I mean, this box is really what this paper is about. This is sort of the spread, which is now close to 0. I mean, it's actually positive. It's 15 basis points, but it's statistically not significant. And this is 1 to 6 months after the branch closure. By the way, notice that here we have actually, prior to this branch closure, there are still firms, of course, which are going to change bank or go to a new bank. And they get a discount rate of 62. This is actually the benchmarking I was talking about before, because this is conditioning on actually being at the branch that is going to be closed in some time in the future. Okay, and not too long in the future, because we're going to have here left censoring in the sense that we don't observe prior to June 2012, and so we're going to have a discount also for those loans, which is very similar to the loans that we saw, the discount received on the switching loans. So there's seemingly nothing special when it comes to other branches assessing firms coming from branches that are going to be closed in the future. There's nothing special there. I mean, these firms that are coming to them are going to receive a very similar discount. However, once the branch is closed, then the discount is no longer there. However, if you start looking at the transfers which are taking place later on, the discount is again going to start showing up. Okay, you can see here after 6 months you do see the discount showing up. After 12 months the discount is back to normal. So these are firms that are showing up at a new bank more than 6 months and more than 12 months after their branch was closed, and they are going to receive back again sort of a discount. So it seems as if those bank branches are now suddenly no longer receiving maybe the volume, even though you can still see that quite a number are going to do the switching, or they don't appreciate the fact that these firms somehow were at that closing branch, or there's a number of different interpretations here that could prevail, but at least it seems as if we're back to normal. Okay, and immediately There's no discount, but later on the discount seems to be back there. Also, again, notice that without matching, we have actually now results which are totally counterintuitive, where actually you have even larger discounts.
Jimmy,
Yes,
quick
sorry.
question. Do you have a number of firms that actually switch before the closure of the branch?
Yeah, so that rates, I don't have it here on the slide, but that rate is not abnormal. Okay, so there's nothing sort of like the good firms leaving and the dogs staying behind. But notice that interpretation would actually, if the dogs stay behind and everybody knows that they're all dogs, I mean, that could be one issue. But we're matching out, among other things, on this credit rating, right? So it's not like there has to be something unobserved. And again, all of these exercises here with these other loan conditions, these bad controls, and again, what's not in the credit rating, what's not in their geography, what's not in their industry, in terms of unobserved quality, could potentially also be nested in that loan condition. But this could be one issue. But the rates are not different. Maybe we should have them there just to sort of make things comparable. Okay, I mean, to some extent, maybe we should also once have it just before 6 months, so to see that the rates are actually nothing. Okay, so then so there's a discount, no discount on the transfer loans, and the transferring after more than 6 months is seemingly back to switching, and again this benchmarking that the switching loans from the closing branches are similarly by receiving branches. Okay. Then you can separate out between first and later transfers, and you can see here that for the first transfer, so this is the first loan that these firms are going to get, we have no discount. Actually, for the first transfer, we see that this lack of discount remains longer. Okay, so this is a firm which is sitting still and is going to get a first transfer, say 7 to 12 months. Okay, there's no discount. However, if we start looking at firms which did a first transfer to some bank and then get a second loan either from that same bank or from another bank, we see for that later transfer immediately the discount. Okay, so it seems as if these banks know that these firms are already on the move, and they consider this second move by the firm almost like a switch. It's much more the firm that is now deciding on what to do. Okay, while before the branch was closed, the firm had nowhere else to go. And this group of firms here, within 6 months, within 12 months, 7 to 12 months, this is the first thing they do. This is the first transfer. Yes?
So your argument is the later transfer is a first post-transfer switch?
Yes. Yeah. So it's sort of conditioning on having had a branch closure. You do your first transfer, and then the second and third and whatever transfers switches are then these guys. So that truly switches again. It's like the firm. Even if you then stay with if you then go to a next bank, this bank knows that you did this intermediate step of going. So, okay. So the first transfer loans up to 12 months, no discount, and then later transfer loans look immediately more like switching loans. Okay, and this is partly an explanation for what we observed before, that only for these 6 months we saw this lack of discount, and this is further digging into this, actually showing that if you start conditioning on which loan you're actually observing, you see again.
You could even argue that the later transfer loans are switching loans.
Fair enough. So this is a matter of lingo. Yeah. But you're right. So maybe we should just say, label this slightly different, or say that they're truly switching loans. Absolutely. Yeah. Okay, and then so I showed you results so far with the sample splits, basically, right? Having matched out these loans, you can then do all the exercises, pooling everything and then formally separating them out within the confines of this exercise with basically interactions. Okay, and if you do that, you will find formally that there are differences in spreads, which I just pointed out. Okay, so you can see here then you have you have here, just to point out, you have the switching loan, and then you have the transfer 6 months after, and you can see here that it's going to be higher, and if you add these two, you get the zero result that we had before. Okay, but this is formally testing that they're different, and then you can do this by first and later transfer. So they do receive different interest rates, and again, the results there, running out of time, soon after closure of the first transfer, the results are also formally there when you do these interactions. Okay, other loan terms. So here the other loan terms, I mean, in the we're going to then look at the rate. This is for the switching loan. This is for the collateralization, maturity, and loan amount. So in each case now, we're going to match out on the other loan conditions. Okay, so we carry those, and clearly, I mean, there's an inconsistency here. If you have the matching on collateral, maturity, and loan amount, and you argue that the loan rate is going to be an outcome which occurs after all of these loan conditions, of course, then you cannot turn around and say, well, let's now look at the collateralized loans and match on loan rate, collateralization of the loans, and match on loan rate, because clearly loan rate is by this first exercise a bad control. Okay, so you can do all of this also without matching on these loan conditions, but the bottom line remains the same. So we have no effect when it comes to switching. We're now to the switching loans here on whether or not the loan is collateralized. We have a slight uptick in maturity, but it's economically very minor, and then loan amount. And notice that this is sort of similar to the results for Bolivia, with the exception that collateralization is not affected here for the switchers in Portugal, while in Bolivia we found that there was a sizable, right, this is 27% increase in the likelihood that the loan was collateralized. And our interpretation in that paper was that, well, if you go to a new bank, you really need to pledge collateral also for future business. So you really have to pledge collateral so that you can start borrowing from this bank. That effect doesn't seem to be present in Portugal. So, and we also had an increase in maturity, but notice in Portugal it's really small, and an increase in the loan amount, but not statistically significant. So now what happens to the transfers? To the transfers, we're going to have pretty much nothing either. So we have no effect on the spread. We have a slight decrease in collateralization, slightly statistically significant, but I would dare to argue economically also fairly small. We have no effect on maturity and no effect on the loan amount, and you can do this splitting off first and latest transfers. Okay. Overall, there doesn't seem to be a whole lot on these other conditions as well. So you don't seem to be getting softer loan terms, you don't get a longer maturity, you don't get a larger loan amount, and in terms of collateralization, nothing much moves either. But then recall that for the switching loans, nothing happened as much as well. Okay, so somewhat mixed impact on these for these transfer loans. So very tentative conclusions. This is going to be something that we've been going to be enjoy ourselves with probably for the next year or so, because there's many ways to look at this data set and this setting of these branch closures. So during normal times, these firms enjoy interest rate discounts when they switch banks. After branch closures, there are no significant interest rate discounts. So it's suggestive of, for the time being, of pool pricing. So all these firms show up, and they get some sort of a non-aggressive or non-poaching interest rate, which is not all that different from the average interest rate that is prevailing with the set of inside and outside banks customers. Okay, so this evidence would be consistent with information asymmetry, because in reasonable models under competitive conditions. By the way, I didn't talk about competition. Maybe I should have, because it's sort of like it was on my mind. I made a note. So market structure competition is not an issue here, because there's so many branches in Portugal. So all of these firms, they may not be located close to a branch of the bank that was being the branch closed that closed the branch, but there's always branches in the vicinity. Like in these axis radius of 5-10 kilometers, there's dozens of branches. Okay, so market structure is not the issue here. So that is sort of controlling for. We really think it's about these information asymmetries, these relationships, and the evidence so far is consistent with this information asymmetry, because we think that under these competitive conditions, in principle, in reasonable models, these shoe leather costs would also be leading to discounts also for transfer loans, because these firms they have these costs of going to another bank, and in principle the bank would be willing to cut a discount for this reason. So sorry we close is the title of the paper, but maybe for some banks the sign should read sorry we're open, and for sure it may also read for some banks sorry with that. So.
Thank you very much. So now we open the floor for the discussion, questions, comments. Yeah.
Quick question. I don't know whether this is an issue in your paper, but do you consider the proximity of the banks to which the clients go after the closure of the branch? I mean, do you consider, that the proximity might be an issue because it might be related to the shortage of cost?
Sure. So that is a very good comment. So for the time being, no, but it's something that we could also start.
When the loan is larger, for smaller loans probably does not matter. So people go to the closed branch. But for larger loans, maybe they start searching for the best offer.
That is a very good comment. So it's a margin. So notice that we condition on the fact that there is no branch of the bank of which the branch is closing within that 5 kilometers. So that is what we do, right? But when it comes to where the firm is actually arriving, we haven't sort of separated out according to distance there, and that is something that we could do. We could say, look, those that are close or those that are far, and are there substantial differences? So, I mean, my presumption would be if I would think. Maybe for those that actually go far, then you may start seeing a discount again, right? Because then that would be my presumption now, but
I have one suggestion and one question. So the suggestion is on collateral. So you have these strange results with collateral.
Well, no results. Yeah, for the switching. Yeah.
Due to the fact that they have a huge recession, all the property prices are nosediving, so there's no collateral value. So
I see.
Ask collateral to.
It's worthless anyway.
Yeah. Right? So maybe that's an explanation.
Well, we're not saying that you don't ask collateral. Eh? We're saying that there's no difference in the asking of collateral, of switching and non-switching, right? So it's.
The reason could be there is very little collateral to ask extra. So
yes, but so it could be. So say my degree of collateralization at the starting bank is 50%. So half the loans are collateralized. I go to the new bank. The switching, collateralization rate is also 50%. That's what we find. But I take it that you maybe for the switching you don't ask extra collateral because of this. Yes, that's true.
Exchange is already an increase actually.
Yeah.
Because the collateral values have fallen.
Yeah. So asking the same is actually. Now notice again. We have here the probability that the loan is collateralized. Of course, we don't have the intensity of collateralization,
Okay.
So that's another caveat.
That's important. Yeah. And then it's maybe a very strange question, but is 5 kilometers not very short?
Okay, that's a very good point. I mean, it's not such a strange question. I was expecting now. No, yeah, but
CEO lives closer to, lives further to the front than the bank branch.
Yeah. So in Belgium, the average distance to branches is like the median. Sorry, is 1.2 miles, and in the US is actually 4 miles. I mean, a bit dated maybe information, but say mid 2000, the median distance was 4 miles. So I don't think 5 kilometers is that crazy, but we can do robustness on it. We haven't done yet, but I think we can. It's sort of.
No, but I agree that most people are on the median close to the bank. But it's something else than saying if it's further than 5, I have reason to move. It's not something you choose. So like socialists want to branch a bit further, but is that reason enough to move if it's 6 or 7 kilometers? If it's 15 or 20, maybe yes. So
I see. So for the time, so what we are doing right now is we're basically lopping off those that we see showing up in a new bank that are within 5 kilometers of the old bank.
Yes.
Okay, so what could that do in terms of selection? they would be more like switches, right? They would be more like switches. So I would expect actually those transfer loans, but it's something we can do. I mean, we can if we vary this, then they would, yeah. Then we would see again more of the switching results come back. Yeah.
It's switching versus transfer. Look at sensitivity basically.
Yeah.
Of the key.
Okay. Yeah.
The questions?
So when I'm thinking about the switching firm to a new bank, so I kind of have difficulties in imagining that the firm would switch in the middle of their relationship with the bank, or in the middle of the credit line, for instance. So most likely when the firm is switching, they've probably already done the business with the previous bank, and then it comes to the new bank. Okay, we're done with this one, so we need a new loan. What can you offer? But when I'm thinking about the transfers, it's not necessarily that the previous relationship or over, it's just the branch they closed. Now the firm tries to find a closer place to do their banking with. So they come to the bank and say, okay, we're kind of having this issue, the branch is closed, but we're still in the middle of the credit line, so can we come to you?
Yeah.
And they say, well, of course, yeah, but we'll give you exactly the same, so we'll match the. So they actually don't have to give them discount. So, you know,
No. It's actually, but surprising maybe, and maybe we should document that more also in this paper, it's actually not the case, in the sense that it's very rare that you see a firm having repaid their loan before actually going to another bank. So it's really, so there is an outstanding loan, and then at some point the firm decides to add another bank and then let that one loan sort of being repaid. So that sort of true switching where you sort of see one relationship being turned off and another relationship being turned on, that you hardly ever see that, neither in the Bolivian data set nor in the Portuguese data set. In and of itself, that is also interesting, and maybe something some people we should actually investigate more closely. But so, I mean, my sense is that is just a matter of a firm maybe potentially expanding a little bit, which would of course come with a certain caveat, or a firm having repaid a certain loan and then seeing an offer from another bank that is really good and they take it, and etc. So it's but the actual sort of like repaying and then closing everything, packing up and going to another bank, you hardly ever observe this. Okay. It's like so, but maybe it's an interesting question per se, because it really potentially tells us something about what may be happening. So maybe it is the firm expanding or seeing a better offer or something like that.
Really interesting. Another thing that I don't know if you can do that with your data, but it would be interesting if you see, for example, if the firm just switched to the branch and then this branch was closed down.
Yeah.
Now it has to transfer.
Okay, that's a good one.
So
yes.
That would be interesting.
Yes, absolutely. So sort of a firm that is caught out in sort of being like arriving at a branch that is suddenly closing. Yeah, we would have to check the documentation though on this, because there may be a bit of anticipation. As you saw in the results, there's not a lot, because clearly in terms when you benchmark by the switching, there doesn't seem to be, but there could still be some anticipation in the months before. But that's nice. Yes, so you arrive there and then suddenly boom, branch is closing, and then maybe you would see different conditions. Again, I would think that then those firms would again be treated more like switches, I would think, right? I mean, they actually. I have to take that back. No, I take that back.
Okay.
That's not. No. But it's interesting. I would like to think more about what then the other banks would have to think about this firm. That's nice. Thank you.
I like this question a lot, and it makes me think of the following for both papers. Actually, it's really an idea. So, to some extent, what is the effect of switching? The lower interest rates could also be maybe the revelation of investment opportunities. So if the firm asks you credit while having already credit, it's probably the case that you have investment plans that are otherwise not observed. It's not that in the account, it's not in the source sheet, as opposed to maybe firm that's in trouble. And maybe one outweighs the other. That would be interesting to look into. And there are a few indexes of investment opportunity. One, for example, is increasing the staff. If a firm is having a switching loan long before the maturity expires of the existing one,
that's a nice one.
Increasing its staff, it's definitely an investment opportunity. And if for these firms you see a bigger discount than for the one that are actually decreasing staff, then some of the effect is actually on the switching effect, but an investment opportunity effect. That would guide something paper actually.
That's a really nice comment, and to some extent, So here we don't match this out very well, but so we could actually we can actually do this in the sense that we can look at the loans and the way they're actually being repaid, and then condition on how these other loans are. That's a really nice one. I have to admit that in the Bolivian paper we sort of worried about that a little bit, and we have a few matches where some of this could be appropriated, but in this paper we haven't done this yet. That's very true. Yeah.
Professor Ongena, which of your findings would you feature as being counterintuitive? I mean, what did you find that you had not anticipated? Which was a surprise to you?
I mean, I think to be honest, for the time being, but this is going to grow as we grow the paper further. For the time being, is actually that the switching discount in this paper is so similar to the one that we found in Bolivia, and also actually that the Italian researchers found. So. It was a bit of a surprising result, because we would have expected, maybe given the slightly different features of the banking system, that there was not necessarily the need to give similar switching discounts. I think, I hope, however, that we will come up with better surprises than that, because to some extent, we want the paper to be a paper about transfer loans, and there, to some extent, the theory will tell us that you don't see a difference, you don't see a discount. So, I mean, it maybe was a surprise that we found that it's consistent with what theoretical frameworks would tell us it would be, which to some extent, as an empiricist, I'm always surprised if I see data tell me things that actually many other peoples in very nice frameworks have thought about, and actually have already offered us hypotheses that seem to also be then present in the data. I think that's sort of always a surprise. So in that respect, yeah.
Other questions or comments? So thank you once again for
Thank you.
the session.
Thank you.